Two co-workers started the same job on the same day, at the same desk, for the same salary. Call them co-worker A and co-worker B. 10 years later, co-worker A is still asking for a payroll advance before every holiday. Co-worker B just gave 2 weeks' notice to travel for a year. Nobody at the office can explain it because on paper, nothing separates them. Same raises, same bonuses, same rent in the same building down the street. The difference isn't visible in a paycheck. It's visible in a garage. Coworker A's garage holds a jet ski used 4 times, a pressure washer bought for 1 weekend project, 3 sets of golf clubs from 3 different this time I'll stick with it attempts, and a treadmill functioning as a coat rack. Coworker B's garage holds a bicycle and 2 boxes. This isn't a story about who earns more. It's a story about a tax nobody files, nobody calculates, and almost nobody notices: the rent you pay on your own possessions for as long as you own them. Today, we're breaking down exactly how that invisible rent works and the handful of decisions that quietly separate people who feel free with money from people who feel owned by it. Here's the part that should bother you a little. Coworker isn't reckless. He doesn't gamble, doesn't have a secret second mortgage, doesn't blow money at casinos. Every single purchase he made looked reasonable in the moment. That's exactly why this trap is so effective. It doesn't announce itself as a mistake. It arrives disguised as a series of perfectly sensible decisions that quietly compound into a life with no slack in it at all. And here's what makes it worse. Nobody warns you about this one. Financial advice loves to talk about interest rates, index funds, and retirement accounts. Almost nobody sits you down and explains that the jet ski, the paddleboard, and the barely used kitchen gadget are quietly doing more damage to your long-term wealth than a slightly too high interest rate ever could. Simply because they're invisible, a high interest rate shows up on a statement. A garage full of depreciating enthusiasm never sends you a bill. It just sits there, silently making sure you never quite get ahead. Here's the idea to hold on to for the rest of this video. Nothing you buy has one price. It has 2. The first price is what you hand over at checkout. The second price is what the item charges you every single day you keep it, in square footage, in upkeep, in the mental bandwidth that quietly runs from your brain, and in the return that money could have earned somewhere else instead. Most people budget for the first price and never notice the second one exists. That blind spot is where financial stress actually lives. Take a $2,800 stand-up paddleboard sitting in a garage. The obvious cost was $2,800. The hidden cost is a slice of a garage that could otherwise be used, straps and a roof rack that had to be bought separately, a slow leak in the air valve nobody's fixed, and the $2,800 that isn't sitting in an account earning anything. Add it up over 5 years and the real cost of that paddleboard easily doubles. It gets worse the bigger the item gets. A boat that costs $22,000 doesn't just sit there quietly depreciating. Marinas charge slip fees. Insurance renews every year whether the boat moved or not. Winterizing it costs a few $100s annually just to prevent damage from an item that's already not being used. Keep than the original purchase price for an asset that's now worth a fraction of what they paid. None of this means don't buy things. It means most people are making decisions with half the information, and the missing half is usually the expensive half. Not the fantasy number, the honest one. A $180 air fryer used 4 times a week for 2 years costs about 43 cents a use. That's an excellent deal. A $180 pasta maker used twice a year costs $90 a use. Same price tag, wildly different value, and the only way to see it is to do the division. This math also flips the script on things that feel expensive but aren't. Mattress used every night for 8 years costs about 31 cents a night. Extraordinary value for something that affects your sleep, your mood, and your energy every single day. Meanwhile, a $60 as seen on TV gadget used once costs $60 for that one use, which is objectively a worse deal than the mattress, even though it felt like the cheap purchase at the time. This one habit quietly kills most impulse buys, because impulse buys almost never survive contact with arithmetic. It works just as well on subscriptions as it does on objects. A $15 a month streaming service you actually watch most weeks is a great deal. A $15 a month app subscription you forgot you had, renewing quietly in the background for the past 14 months, has already cost you $210 for zero actual use. Money leaking out in amounts too small to notice individually but large enough, added together, to matter quite a lot. Walk through your space and, item by item, ask one question: if this vanished tonight, would I go buy it again tomorrow? Be honest. The waffle iron. The exercise bands from 2 New Years ago. The 4 when we host serving dishes that have hosted nothing. The specialty cookware bought during one ambitious cooking phase that lasted about 3 weeks. For most of what people own, the answer is no. It's there through momentum, not intention. Anything that fails this test is already costing you and giving nothing back. It's not neutral. It's quietly renting space in your home and your head for zero return. And that mental rent is real. Studies on clutter consistently find that visible disorganized possessions raise stress hormones and make it measurably harder to focus, even when you're not actively thinking about them. People who go through this exercise honestly are often startled by how much of what they own belongs to a version of themselves that no longer exists, a hobby they dropped, a size they no longer are, a someday project they've quietly given up on without admitting it. There's a specific kind of spending that feels like progress, but is really just erosion, replacing a phone, a couch, a car, or a jacket not because it broke, but because you got bored of it or something newer exists. Broken is a fact. Boring is a feeling. People who build a real financial margin only spend money to solve the first one. Run this over 20 years and the gap is enormous. Someone who replaces a functioning phone every 2 years instead of every 4 or 5 spends thousands extra for zero added function, money that could have compounded instead of depreciated. Apply that same pattern to a car, replaced every 3 years instead of driven for 10. And the lifetime difference stops being thousands and starts being well into 6 figures once you account for what that money could have earned sitting in investments instead. The uncomfortable truth is that most upgrades upgrade nothing except your bank statement's direction of travel. Willpower is unreliable. It's strong in the morning and gone by 9 p.m. after a rough day. So instead of trying to out-willpower every temptation, build a setup where the easy path is already the smart one. On the spending side, delete the saved card from your phone and follow the accounts that exist to sell you things. And subscribe from the promotional emails that exist purely to manufacture urgency you didn't have 5 minutes ago, and give yourself a real 24-hour pause before anything non-essential. On the saving side, set the transfer to investments for the same day your paycheck lands, so the money is gone before you ever see a balance to be tempted by. Keep only a small working amount in the account you actually see day to day, so there's never a large idle number sitting there quietly suggesting things to buy with it. Most people who can't seem to save don't have a discipline problem. They have a design problem. Every default in their life points towards spending, and no amount of willpower reliably beats a well-designed default forever. Change the defaults instead of fighting them daily. Think about how retailers already understand this in reverse. One-click checkout exists to remove every possible moment of friction between an impulse and a completed purchase, because retailers know friction kills sales. Do the same thing for your own goals. Add friction where you want less behavior, remove it where you want more, and stop expecting a daily internal battle to hold the line that a 5-minute setup change could hold for you automatically. Pick one category: shirts, kitchen tools, unread books, pairs of shoes, and actually count it. Not estimate. Count. People are consistently shocked by the real number because accumulation happens one small purchase at a time, quietly, below the threshold of noticing. Nobody decides to own 40 t-shirts in one sitting. It happens 4 at a time, over years, until the number is absurd and nobody remembers deciding on it. Once you know the number, the next purchase in that category stops feeling like just one thing and starts feeling like what it is. Now it's 31. That single shift in framing does more to slow down consumption than almost any budgeting app. Because it replaces a vague feeling with a concrete, slightly embarrassing fact. New interests generate a rush of motivation that convinces you to buy everything at once: the gear, the outfit, the accessories, the matching bag for the accessories. Most of that motivation fades within a month, whether or not the interest itself sticks. Rent the kayak twice before buying one. Borrow a friend's guitar for a month before ordering an amp and 3 pedals. Take a few classes at a studio before building a home gym around an interest you've had for 11 days. If the interest survives contact with a rental fee and a little inconvenience, it's probably real. If it doesn't, you just saved yourself a garage item and a small monument to a phase. The kind of thing that sits there for years quietly reminding you of money you can't get back. Expense. A pool doesn't just cost the pool. It costs chemicals, a cover, furniture around it, and higher utility bills for years afterward. A truck doesn't just cost the truck. It costs the insurance bump, the gas difference, and the extra maintenance for as long as you own it. A dog doesn't just cost the adoption fee. It costs food, vet visits, boarding when you travel, and a lease that somehow needs replacing every year. A major purchase. Ask what else it quietly requires downstream. The sticker price is often just the entry fee to an entire ecosystem of smaller ones that never show up in the original decision, and by the time they do show up, they feel like separate, unrelated expenses instead of the direct consequence of that one purchase. Try this exercise before your next big purchase. Write down every downstream cost you can think of before you buy, not after. A home gym isn't just equipment. It's flooring to protect the floor underneath, a mirror, maybe a fan or ventilation upgrade, and often storage bins for all the small accessories that come with it. Add those up honestly beforehand, and a $3,000 decision often turns into a $4,500 one before it's even finished. Information you'd much rather have on the way and then discover in pieces over the following year. This is the one that traps people at every income level, including high earners. Income goes up, so the lifestyle quietly expands to match it, so the income increase disappears into the new normal, and nothing actually improves except the numbers on the pay stub. The fix is deciding in advance what a genuinely sufficient home, car, and wardrobe look like for you before the next raise arrives to tempt you into moving that line. Someone who fixes enough early and then earns more sends the difference straight into savings and investments. Someone who keeps redefining enough upward can double their income over a decade and still feel exactly as broke as they did at the start, just with nicer things to show for it. Write your own numbers down somewhere you'll actually see again, not as a restriction, but as a finish line you get to decide on ahead of time, instead of one that keeps sliding away from you every time your income moves. A defined enough is one of the only things that can turn a raise into actual wealth instead of just a slightly nicer version of the same paycheck-to-paycheck cycle. A massive weekend purge, a burst of motivation, bags to donation, and a satisfying empty closet. Then, slowly, without anyone noticing the moment it happens, everything creeps back. 2 years later, they're doing the same purge again, having quietly rebuilt the exact problem they solved. The fix isn't a bigger purge. It's a smaller, more frequent one. A 5-minute look at one drawer each week. One category evaluated each month. This catches accumulation while it's still 3 items instead of letting it become 300. Removing a handful of things regularly is sustainable in a way that removing everything once a year never quite is. Because it never asks you to summon a giant burst of motivation you may not have on any given weekend. Is the biggest one. Instead of measuring wealth by what you own, measure it by what you could do tomorrow if you needed to. Could you take 3 unpaid months off for a family emergency? Could you leave a job that's grinding you down without panicking about next month's bills? Could you say no to a client, a project, or an opportunity that pays well but costs your peace? Could you help a friend or family member in a real crisis without it becoming your own crisis too? Those options are what actual financial security buys, not a driveway full of things, but a life with room to maneuver in it. And that room only exists for people who built a gap between what they earn and what they spend, instead of letting the gap get filled automatically by whatever's easiest to buy next. Someone earning $200,000 but spending $195,000 of it has almost no room in that life at all. Every month is a tightrope regardless of the number on the offer letter. Someone earning a third of that but spending half of it has genuine options most high earners never get to experience because options were never about the size of the income. They were always about the size of the gap underneath it. There's a specific moment worth catching, the point right after you've decided you're into something new when the temptation is to go all in immediately. A new hobby, a new sport, a new craft. The instinct is to buy the full kit on day one, as if owning the gear were the same thing as having the skill. Slow that moment down. Rent the equipment for the first few outings. Take a class before buying a setup. Borrow before you buy every time it's realistically possible. This does 2 things at once. It tells you honestly whether the interest survives past the initial excitement, which is worth knowing before, not after, several $100s are spent. And it teaches you exactly what you actually need so that if you do eventually buy, you're buying the right thing instead of guessing based on marketing and enthusiasm. Garages across the country are full of the alternative approach. Equipment bought at full enthusiasm for interests that quietly evaporated a few months later, sitting there as a slightly expensive reminder that excitement and commitment are not the same thing. None of this is about deprivation. Nobody here is telling you to sit on a milk crate and call it minimalism. It's about seeing the second price tag that most people never learn to read, the one that keeps charging you long after the receipt is gone, quietly, in square footage and upkeep and mental noise and money that could have been growing somewhere else instead. Coworker A and Coworker B never had different salaries. They had different relationships with the second price. One kept paying it without knowing it existed, purchase after reasonable-looking purchase, until the garage was full and the freedom was gone. The other learned to read it early and used what he saved to buy something no amount of stuff was ever going to give him, room to choose what his life looked like next, on his own schedule, on his own terms. The math has always been available to everyone. Most people just never learned where to look for it. Now you have. The only question left is what you do with it starting today. Start small if you need to. Pick one drawer, one shelf, one category, and run the disappearing test on it this week. Notice what comes up. Notice how it feels to admit that something you paid good money for is quietly costing you more than it's worth just by sitting there. That small, slightly uncomfortable moment of honesty is where every single habit in this video actually begins, not with a dramatic overhaul, but with one drawer looked at clearly. For the first time in a long time,